next building I'd like to take a look at is a modern design like this block of flats. Typically, this kind of building would be constructed from breeze blocks, concrete and maybe reinforced steel girders. This is a pretty generic design, but it's typical of many modern structures that may be found in the Middle East or the Balkans or any other modern conflict. This particular kit is cast from plaster and therefore is pretty heavy when it's all built up. A lot of the details are all integral, like these metal shutters, balconies, etc. I'm actually going to represent some serious battle damage to this, and I'm going to break some of this balcony away, and I've actually left the front of the balcony off completely. I'm going to use a pair of pliers and I'm going to try and break this corner off and make it look as realistic as possible without taking off too much material. Here it goes. That's not too bad. Don't want to go too deep. You can snap a bit away here. It's actually behaving itself reasonably well. So we've made our initial break, but it does look a little bit too clean and clinical here. So I'm actually going to use this very, very coarse file just to tap off this sharp edge and make a more scale looking effect. The idea here is to create lots of small chips which look more scale. We have real world cracks which we don't want, we just want it nicely, finely chipped up. And you can even take this back slightly to represent where some of the surface concrete has splintered away when this fell down. The damage we're trying to represent here could have been a hit from a tank shell, and when that happens there's lots of other small areas of damage that surround the whole area. I'm going to use this pointed tool to create some more pitting in the plaster surface just by stabbing away at the surface of the model. This takes a little while because it tends to make holes at first until the chunks of plaster start peeling away. But this all adds to the realism of it. Imagine where the shell might have come in from and centralise your damage on that part. And come down the face of the building, making sure that if you make any particular linear marks that they radiate away from the area of damage as though the shrapnel's travelled outwards. You can keep on doing this for your heart's content, but I think for the purposes of our program that's probably about enough. Where the corner of our balcony is being blown away, the steel reinforcement bars will be exposed. So we're going to drill some small holes into the edge here and insert some solder to represent those on our model. Ever so easy to drill into plaster, but we need to not crack it if possible. I've pre-cut some lengths of solder and I'm going to simply insert these just to see how it looks. Obviously these mustn't extend beyond the edge of the original concrete because they wouldn't be sticking out of it. So once they're glued in we'll trim them and make sure that it looks correct. I'm going to take them out one at a time and then refix them with a small drop of super glue on the end. Right, we've established a matrix of steel reinforcement bars here, and just to suggest that they were originally welded together, I'm going to put a small drop of super glue behind the ones at the back. And it actually doesn't matter that we'll see the droplet because this is going to represent the weld between these bars. And I'm just going to trim along the ends to bring it all into the right position. And now using a pair of tweezers I'm just going to bend this solder down to make it look like it had a really hard knock from a tank shell. The concrete is tumbled down. Doesn't matter if some of those pretend welds come apart, they'll leave behind a little welt of super glue which will look like the weld itself where it's been broken apart. Where the big lumps of concrete have been blown off the steel reinforcement bars, they're to fall onto the ground, but small chips will remain, and we can just make use of the chips we made earlier ourselves, then apply some small drops of super glue and just stick a couple of these chunks back in just to suggest where lumps of concrete are still hanging on with grim life to their steel reinforcement bars. To further suggest that those reinforced steel bars were embedded in the concrete, I'm going to spray on a little bit of Johnson's Clear just at the base here. And then while that's still wet, I'm going to sprinkle on a bit of our plaster dust. Just enough in there just to stick slightly. Because there's always a bit of the concrete sticking onto these bars whenever you see this effect. And then to fix that in position, I'm going to turn the air right down on the airbrush, otherwise it will just blow that plaster dust off. And then I'm going to just dust on a little bit of the clear. And that just fixes it in place. When that's dry, it shrinks away, leaving just the plaster dust.